Is saving the planet a national or a state issue? So right now, the biggest issue that the United States faces is climate change, and we've played a major part in increasing and amplifying this problem. So we're the second largest producer of greenhouse gases as of 2018, and we're also an economic leader in all of the industrial activities that produce the most carbon dioxide. And the debate is climate change a serious threat? If you look at the effects, it definitely is. The wildfires have killed several people in California in the past few years, as well as tropical storms that are becoming all the more common in the southeastern United States. So the federal versus state government stance on this issue is pretty divided, really fluctuates with whoever is in power. President Trump withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Accord in 2017 and also reversed about 100 rules that were supposed to protect the environment. State governments kind of vary. A recent study by the Pew Research Center shows that Democrats are a lot more likely to support climate legislation than Republicans are. So in order for our planet to stay safe, the federal government has to take charge of environmental issues and create regulations on greenhouse gas emissions that every state, regardless of their political ideologies, must obey. Federalism and the environment. So for this, I believe that dual federalism is the best way for the federal government to take control of the environmental issues, and the Supremacy Clause can really help with this. It declares all legislation passed by Congress, as well as the Constitution, as the supreme law of the land. So any legislation passed by Congress regarding the environment, every single state would have to follow, regardless of if they think climate change is a threat or not. And then the it's a Supreme Court case from 2004, the Alaska versus the Environmental Protection Agency court case, and we're going to get into that in the next slide. And the Clean Air Act was also passed in 1970, and this is going to play a big part in Alaska versus EPA. So this case started when an Alaska company received a permit to operate a zinc mine, but they had to apply for a permit because the mine was going to release greenhouse gases. And the Clean Air Act requires companies that are going to release greenhouse gases to be equipped with the best pollution technology at the time. And this Alaskan company was not. So the EPA came after them, and the case reached the Supreme Court, and they ruled in favor of the EPA in a 5-4 decision, and Justice Ginsburg wrote that only the EPA can check on private companies that emit pollutants from their factories. They can only be the ones to check if the best pollution prevention technology is being used. The states might bend the regulations in order to benefit their economic interests, like Alaska might have done if the EPA hadn't stepped in. And it must act as like an unbiased check, kind of like the Supreme Court, a check on whether if this is hurting the environment or if it isn't. That's kind of the EPA's role. And it also increased the EPA's role in the power balance between them and state governments. So positive and negative effects. The federal government, what we're seeing right now, a big minus is that the federal government, the majority, doesn't really quote-unquote believe that climate change is a serious issue, and they aren't taking any action. But if they did, the Supremacy Clause would make really extreme, sweeping, effective legislation as law for every single state, and they'd all have to follow it, regardless of their political ideologies, and that would ultimately help our planet and make it habitable in the long run. If state governments regulate environmental issues, they know which specific actions have to be taken to fight the effects of climate change, but they might bend federal regulations, as we saw in Alaska versus EPA, to fit their economic standings. So some people might say the states know best, but I am sure they do. But in this case, climate change is now, and 24 states, maybe 20, 30 states that are acting against climate change is not as good as 50. So the federal government needs to unite us on this issue. And the 10th Amendment, which reserves all powers not delegated in the Constitution to the states, you might say that the 10th Amendment allows the states to regulate environmental issues because it's not mentioned in the Constitution, but Congress does have the power under the Commerce Clause to regulate fossil fuel production as well as products that heavily rely on fuels like cars within the states, and as well as the transportation of those products between the states. And the transportation also uses fossil fuels. So Congress has a big role to play here. And in conclusion, climate legislation has to be passed by the federal government. It has to act as an unbiased check that relies on scientific findings. If the issue is left to the states, some states may continue with really good legislation, whereas other states may continue with inaction and dormancy, really, in response to this. A dual federalist approach is the one that we need to take when we talk about solving climate change, and also needs to incorporate the needs of the states into environmental laws, and that will result in something that is best for our communities and ultimately for the planet. So, yeah, thank you so much.